At Thanksgiving dinner, my husband threw me out of the house I bought for his family. He thought I was broken. He didn't know I had an eviction notice and divorce papers waiting for him right outside. The scent of Thanksgiving was a carefully constructed lie. It wasn't the warm, honest smell of a family gathering, but a cloying symphony of competing aromas. The rich, savory perfume of the 20-pound turkey I'd wrestled out of the oven an hour ago was being suffocated by the aggressive cinnamon and clove potpourri my mother-in-law, Eleanor, insisted on simmering on the stove. To her, it smelled like tradition. To me, it smelled like a desperate attempt to mask the decay setting in at the heart of our family. I stood for a moment in the arched doorway of the dining room, a ghost in my own home. The long mahogany table, a wedding gift from my late parents, gleamed under the light of the crystal chandelier. I'd spent 2 hours that morning polishing it, just as I'd spent an hour polishing the silverware that now lay sparkling at each of the 12 place settings. Every surface reflected a distorted version of me, a woman who looked the part of the gracious hostess, the happy wife. It was a performance, and I was exhausted. This house, a sprawling colonial with pristine white siding and perfectly manicured lawns in one of Connecticut's most desirable zip codes, was supposed to be my sanctuary. Instead, it felt like a museum exhibit. And I wasn't a family member. I was the unpaid, invisible curator of the Rockwellian fantasy my husband's family sold to the world. "Clara, darling, you're daydreaming." Ethan's voice, smooth as velvet, broke through my thoughts. He glided up behind me, placing his hands on my shoulders. To anyone watching, it was a gesture of affection. I felt it for what it was, a reminder of ownership. Everyone's waiting for the toast. He led me to my seat beside him at the head of the table. His father, Richard, a man who looked like he was carved from granite and disapproval, was already pouring an expensive Bordeaux into his glass. His eyes, cold and assessing, swept over the table, not missing a single detail, his gaze sliding right past me as if I were part of the furniture. Eleanor, his wife, offered a tight, painted-on smile. She adjusted the silk scarf at her throat, a nervous habit that appeared whenever she was about to deliver a backhanded compliment. Ethan tapped his glass with a fork, the clear chime silencing the low murmur of conversation from his aunts, uncles, and cousins. "To family," he began, his public voice resonating with warmth and confidence. "To another year of health and success. And to my parents, who taught me the value of legacy." His eyes met mine for a fleeting second, a cursory nod that was more for the audience than for me. "And to my beautiful wife, Clara, for making all of this possible." The words were hollow, a line in a script he'd long since memorized. A polite ripple of applause went through the room. I felt the heat of a dozen pairs of eyes on me, and I forced a smile. Sophia, Ethan's younger sister and the family's pampered princess, raised her glass with a flourish. Her eyes, so much like Ethan's, held a familiar glint of condescending amusement. She was the one who always found a way to remind me that I didn't belong, that I was an outsider who'd somehow lucked into their world. My mind drifted away from the drone of small talk, back to a time when this all felt real. It drifted back 5 years, to a cramped coffee shop that smelled of burnt espresso and desperation. Ethan hadn't been the confident titan of industry then. He'd been a terrified young man, his face pale, his hands trembling as he clutched a lukewarm mug. His family's prestigious construction firm, a 3-generation legacy, was on the brink of collapse. A series of bad investments and a dishonest partner had pushed them to the edge of bankruptcy. Richard's pride, the very bedrock of their family's identity, was about to be shattered into a million pieces. I had just lost my own parents in a car accident 6 months prior. The grief was still a raw, open wound, but their passing had left me with a substantial inheritance. $500,000. It felt like blood money, a fortune I would have traded in a heartbeat to have them back. That day, Ethan had looked at me, his eyes filled with a vulnerability I had never seen before or since. "Clara," he'd whispered, his voice cracking, "I don't know who else to turn to. We're going to lose everything. The business, the house, my father, it will destroy him. He took my hands across the rickety table. This isn't just about saving my family, he'd pleaded, his grip tightening. It's about building ours. If you help us, if you could use the money to buy the house, to give us the capital we need to survive, I swear to you, it will always be your home. It'll be in your name. Your security, forever. You wouldn't just be my wife. You'd be the woman who saved us. My family will be indebted to you for the rest of their lives. I looked into his desperate eyes, and I saw a future. I saw a man I loved, a chance to build a new family from the ashes of my own. My parents had always taught me that love was about sacrifice. And so, driven by a blinding love and a naive, desperate need to belong, my fatal flaw, I said yes. I wrote the check. I transferred my entire inheritance, the last tangible piece of my parents, into an escrow account. I bought the house outright, saving them from financial ruin and public humiliation. I truly believed I was buying into a family, not just a property. A sharp nudge brought me back to the present. It was Eleanor. "Clara, dear, the gravy is wonderful," she said, her voice syrupy sweet. She paused for effect, then added, "Just a little lumpy this time. You must have been rushed." I felt my cheeks flush. Sophia snickered softly into her napkin. I looked at Ethan, hoping for a sliver of support, but he was deep in conversation with his father, ignoring the subtle sting of his mother's words. It was a familiar pattern. They were a pack. I was the lone animal they allowed to live on the periphery, useful, but never truly one of them. Later, as I was clearing the dessert plates, I overheard Sophia talking loudly in the living room. "I found the most perfect location for my new boutique," she announced. "It's a huge investment, of course, but Daddy says it's time I made my mark on the world." I felt a cold knot of dread form in my stomach. I knew what was coming. I had known for weeks. This Thanksgiving wasn't a celebration. It was a prelude. I carried the heavy stack of plates into the kitchen, my reflection in the dark window, showing a woman I barely recognized, her smile as fragile as the porcelain in her hands. The weeks following that Thanksgiving were a slow, chilling descent. The invisible chains I'd felt for years began to tighten, their links becoming colder, sharper. Ethan's control, once a subtle undercurrent, became an overt display of power. He'd put me on an allowance, a humiliatingly small sum deposited into my account each month. When I gently reminded him that my inheritance was what kept the family business afloat, that my money had paid for the roof over our heads, he'd laughed. A cold, dismissive sound. "Don't be dramatic, Clara. That was a gift. You're my wife. What's yours is mine." My life became a carefully curated series of approvals. He'd vet my plans with friends, often canceling them at the last minute with a casual, "I don't feel like you going out tonight." He criticized my clothes, my opinions, even the way I answered the phone. He was an expert at twisting my reality, making me feel like I was the one who was unreasonable, too sensitive, or losing my mind. The gaslighting was so constant, so insidious, that I began to doubt my own perceptions. It was Maria, my one true friend from college, who held up a mirror to the madness. We met for coffee one Tuesday afternoon, a rare escape I'd managed to secure by telling Ethan I had a dental appointment. Maria, a sharp, no-nonsense paralegal with eyes that missed nothing, took one look at me, and her cheerful expression fell. "Clara, you look like a ghost," she said, her voice laced with concern. "What is he doing to you?" The question was so direct, so free of judgment, that the dam inside me finally broke. The story of the allowance, the canceled plans, the constant criticism, it all came tumbling out in a hushed, trembling torrent. I told her about the lumpy gravy, about the way his family looked through me, about the gnawing feeling that I was nothing more than a walking, talking bank account to them. She listened patiently, her hand covering mine on the table. When I was finished, she didn't offer platitudes. She offered clarity. "Oh, honey," she said, her voice firm. "He didn't marry you. He acquired you. This isn't a marriage. It's a hostile takeover, and it's time to liquidate your asset." Her words, though harsh, were a lifeline in the fog of my confusion. For the first time, I felt validated. I wasn't crazy. This wasn't normal. The true catalyst, The moment the cracks didn't just appear, but shattered into a million irreparable pieces, came 2 weeks before the next Thanksgiving. I was in our master bedroom, searching for a book I'd misplaced. The door to the adjoining home office, which Ethan and I shared, was slightly ajar. I heard voices from the sunroom beyond it. Ethan and Sophia. They must have thought I was out for my evening walk. Sophia's laugh, high and shrill, drifted through the doorway. I still can't believe she just handed over $500,000 like it was nothing, she said, her voice dripping with derision. Did she honestly think Dad was going to put her on the company board? The nail technician? I froze, my hand hovering over a stack of books. My blood ran cold. Then came Ethan's reply. His voice, stripped of its public charm, was clinical and cruel. It was a voice I had never heard before, and it terrified me. She's useful, sophomore, and the house is the perfect collateral for your new business. It's a rock-solid asset, and the bank is ready to move. She's too timid to ever question it. Honestly, it was the best deal I ever made. The world tilted. The air left my lungs. A deal. That's what I was. Not a wife, not a partner, not the savior of his family. I was a deal. A transaction. The best one he ever made. Every kind word, every tender touch, every promise he had ever made replayed in my mind, now tainted, twisted into a grotesque montage of deceit. The love I thought I had, the family I thought I'd bought into, was a phantom, an elaborate, 5-year-long lie. I backed away from the door, silent as a shadow, my heart hammering against my ribs. I sank onto the edge of our bed, the luxurious duvet feeling like a shroud. The shock was a physical force, a wave of ice water that left me numb. But as the numbness receded, something else took its place. It wasn't sadness. It wasn't even the white-hot rage I expected. It was a cold, quiet, and absolute clarity. The kind of clarity that comes when you have nothing left to lose. I didn't confront them. An emotional outburst was what they'd expect. They would twist it, call me hysterical, and use it as further proof of my instability. No, my response had to be as cold and calculated as their deception. The next morning, I called Maria. You were right, I said, my voice devoid of any emotion. It's time to liquidate. She didn't ask questions. I have someone for you, she said. His name is Mr. Davies. He eats men like your husband for breakfast. The following week, I sat in a leather chair across from a man with graying temples and eyes that seemed to see right through me. I told Mr. Davies everything, my voice steady, my hands folded calmly in my lap. I laid out the facts. The wire transfer from my inheritance account directly to the escrow company. The deed to the house, which was, as Ethan had promised in a moment of legal necessity at the time, solely in my name. I recounted, with chilling accuracy, the verbal promises, the years of emotional and financial control. He listened without interruption, his face impassive. When I was done, he leaned back in his chair. Mrs. Collins, he said, calling me by Ethan's last name for the first and last time. They made a critical mistake. They underestimated you. We devised a plan. It was meticulous, strategic, and ruthless. Mr. Davies prepared the divorce papers, citing irreconcilable differences and emotional cruelty. He drew up a formal eviction notice for Ethan Collins, Richard Collins, and Eleanor Collins. He even prepared a petition for a temporary restraining order, just in case. My job was to play the part. In the days leading up to Thanksgiving, I became the perfect wife. I was quiet, compliant, and agreeable. I nodded and smiled in all the right places. Ethan and his family mistook my silence for submission, my newfound calm for defeat. Their arrogance grew, their dismissiveness becoming more blatant. They had no idea they were walking into a perfectly laid trap. I remember thinking, as I planned the Thanksgiving menu, that I used to be terrified of the silence Ethan punished me with. But now I welcomed it. It was the space where I could think, where I could plan. He thought he was controlling me, but he was just giving me the time I needed to dismantle his entire world. The gilded cage was about to be broken, not from the outside, but from within. Thanksgiving Day arrived cloaked in a deceptive calm. The house was filled with the same people, the same smells, the same simmering tensions as the year before. But this time, I was not a participant in the charade. I was its director. I moved through the day with a strange sense of detachment, an out-of-body calm that felt like power. I watched them all. Ethan, holding court with his uncles. Eleanor, rearranging flowers that were already perfect. Sophia, scrolling through her phone with a bored expression, and I felt nothing but a profound, chilling pity. They were actors in a play, and the final act was about to begin. We sat down to dinner. The scene was a perfect replica of 100 other family gatherings. The turkey was carved, the wine was poured, the polite, meaningless chatter filled the air. I ate slowly, methodically, feeling the weight of the moment settling over me. My heart wasn't racing. It was steady, beating a slow, deliberate rhythm, like a drum before a battle. The spark came, as I knew it would, from Sophia. After dessert, Richard tapped his glass, a self-satisfied smirk on his face. "Before we all get too comfortable," he announced, "I'd like to raise a glass to my brilliant daughter, Sophia. Her plans for her new boutique are moving forward, and I'm proud to announce that the family is making a significant investment to make her dream a reality." He beamed at her. "It's truly wonderful what this family can achieve when we pool our resources." He looked around the table, his gaze sweeping over everyone, a king surveying his court. As always, his eyes slid right over me, as if I were a ghost at the feast. This was it, the cue. I carefully placed my fork and knife on my plate, the soft clink of metal on porcelain silencing the table. I took a sip of water, my hand perfectly steady. "That's a wonderful idea, Sophia," I said. My voice was not loud, but it was clear and carried the weight of absolute conviction. It cut through the room like a shard of glass. "But this house will not be used as collateral." I paused, letting the words hang in the air, and then delivered the final blow. "It is not a family resource." Silence. A thick, suffocating silence fell over the room. You could have heard a pin drop on the plush oriental rug. Every eye turned to me. Sophia's jaw dropped. Richard's face, a moment ago so full of paternal pride, hardened into a mask of disbelief and fury. Eleanor's hand flew to her throat, her pearls suddenly looking like a noose. I looked only at Ethan. His face went through a rapid, terrifying series of transformations. First shock, then confusion, and finally a dark, consuming rage that seemed to radiate from him in waves. He pushed his chair back so violently it scraped against the hardwood floor. "What?" he seethed, the word a low growl. "Did you just say?" I met his gaze without flinching. "You heard me." That was all it took. The veneer of the charming, successful lawyer cracked and fell away, revealing the ugly, violent creature beneath. Before anyone could react, he was on his feet, his chair clattering to the floor behind him. He lunged across the small space between us and grabbed my upper arm, his fingers digging into my flesh like talons. "Who do you think you are?" he snarled, his face inches from mine, his breath hot with wine and rage. He yanked me from my chair. I stumbled, my knee hitting the leg of the table. A gasp went through the room, but no one moved. His parents and sister watched, frozen, their faces a mixture of horror and fascination. They were spectators at a blood sport they had tacitly encouraged for years. He dragged me from the dining room, my feet scrambling to find purchase on the polished floors. He pulled me through the grand foyer, past the beautiful curved staircase, toward the front door. The entire time, he was hissing a litany of insults into my ear. "Ungrateful bitch. You think you can talk to me like that in my own house? After everything we've given you?" He fumbled with the heavy oak door, wrenched it open, and shoved me out into the cold November night. I was so off balance that I fell, landing hard on the damp, cold grass of the perfectly manicured lawn. The door slammed shut behind me, the sound echoing in the sudden, shocking silence. I lay there for a moment, the wet chill of the earth seeping through my dress. The humiliation was a physical thing, a crushing weight on my chest. I could see their silhouettes through the glowing windows, their faces turned toward the door, watching, waiting for my tears, for my desperate pleas to be let back in. This was my lowest point, the ultimate degradation. Thrown out of the house I had paid for, like a piece of trash. But then something shifted inside me. The plan, the clarity, the cold, hard fury I had been nursing for weeks. It all came rushing back, not as a wave of emotion, a torrent of terror and relief. I pushed myself up, my knees shaky, my hands smeared with damp earth. I brushed the grass from my dress, straightened my shoulders, and turned to face the house. I walked to the front door and stood on the porch under the warm glow of the lantern light. I didn't knock. I waited. A moment later, the door was pulled open. It was Ethan. His face was still contorted with rage, his chest heaving. He had expected me to be a sobbing wreck. He was not prepared for the woman standing before him. I looked at him, and for the first time in 5 years, I smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It was a cold, sharp, and utterly terrifying smile. The smile of a woman who had nothing left to fear. "Your house, Ethan?" I asked, my voice as calm and chilling as the night air. He stared at me, confusion warring with his anger. "Get off my property," he spat. "Funny you should mention that," I said. I reached into the small clutch purse I had strategically left on the foyer table and retrieved my phone. "I thought you should all know what the family resources really think." I pressed play. The sound of his own voice, my voice, filled the night. "She's useful, sophomore. And the house is the perfect collateral for your new business. She's too timid to ever question it. It was the best deal I ever made." His voice, stripped of all artifice, echoed from the small speaker of my phone. I saw Sophia's face appear behind him in the doorway, her skin draining of all color. Richard and Eleanor appeared too, their expressions of righteous indignation crumbling into pure, naked horror. Not horror at the sentiment, but horror at its public exposure. Ethan stood there, utterly stunned, his mouth hanging open. He looked like a fish gasping for air. And at that exact moment, as if choreographed by fate itself, a dark sedan pulled quietly into the driveway, its headlights cutting through the darkness. A man in a simple, dark suit got out and walked calmly up the stone path. He nodded politely at me and then addressed my shell-shocked husband. "Ethan Collins?" the man asked. Ethan could only nod, dumbfounded. The man extended a thick manila envelope. "You've been served." The process server placed the documents into Ethan's limp hand, turned, and walked back to his car as silently as he had arrived. I looked at Ethan, at the despised documents in his hand, at the ruins of his arrogant face. I let the silence stretch for a beat, savoring the beautiful, terrible perfection of the moment. Then I delivered my final lines. "Those are divorce papers, Ethan. And that," I said, nodding towards the envelope, "is an eviction notice. You and your parents have 30 days to vacate my property." I looked past him at the shocked faces of Richard and Eleanor and Sophia, clustered in the doorway like frightened crows. "Happy Thanksgiving," I said. Then I turned my back on them, on the house, on my entire life, and walked away into the darkness, each step feeling lighter than the last. I didn't look back. I walked down the long, tree-lined driveway, the crisp night air feeling like a baptism. I didn't know where I was going, not exactly, but I knew I was moving toward freedom. By the time I reached the main road, my hands were shaking, a delayed reaction to the adrenaline that had been coursing through my veins. I pulled out my phone and called the only person I knew I could count on. "Maria?" I said, my voice finally trembling. "It's done." I spent that night at Maria's apartment, wrapped in a blanket on her couch. It was only there, in the safety of her small, warm living room, that I finally allowed myself to break down. The tears weren't for the loss of Ethan or the family I once thought I had. They were tears of terror and profound, bone-deep relief. I was purging 5 years of suppressed pain, of feeling invisible, of being slowly eroded. I was grieving the woman I used to be, the naive girl who believed love could conquer anything. The family, of course, did not go quietly. The humiliation of being so publicly dismantled sent them into a frenzy. Within days, Ethan's lawyer, a man as slick and soulless as he was, filed a countersuit. They claimed my initial $500,000 payment was a spousal gift freely given, and that by evicting them, I was committing a form of fraud. They demanded the house be placed in a trust and that I pay them damages for emotional distress. It was audacious, a complete fabrication, but they had money and influence. Worse than the lawsuit was the smear campaign. The story they spun was a masterpiece of victim blaming. I was painted as a manipulative gold digger, a quiet, cunning woman who had tricked their loving son, wormed my way into their family, and then, in a fit of greed, tried to steal their ancestral home. The lies spread like wildfire through their social circle. Friends I'd once had coffee with now crossed the street to avoid me. The whispers followed me everywhere. For a few dark weeks, I felt the weight of their narrative pressing down on me, and a flicker of fear ignited. What if the world chose to believe them? What if I lost? Just as my resolve began to waver, a miracle arrived in my inbox. It was an email with the subject line, "I think I can help." The sender was Robert Collins, Ethan's estranged uncle. I vaguely remembered him from my wedding, a quiet, kind-eyed man who had been ostracized from the family years ago for refusing to participate in one of Richard's ruthless business schemes. I opened the email with trembling hands. "Clara," it read, "I heard what Richard and his boy are doing to you. It's their standard playbook. They destroy anyone who doesn't serve their purpose. I was pushed out years ago, and I've stayed silent. I won't anymore. Perhaps this will help you." Attached was a scanned PDF. It was an email chain between Robert and Richard, dated 1 week before Ethan had first approached me for money 5 years ago. In it, Richard was practically begging Robert for a loan, explicitly detailing the company's imminent bankruptcy and his utter desperation. The final email from Richard was the smoking gun. "We are ruined, Rob. Unless I can find a miracle investor in the next month, everything my father built will be gone." I stared at the screen, tears blurring the words. It was irrefutable proof. Proof of their financial state, proof of their malicious intent, proof that they hadn't just accepted a gift, but had actively sought out a miracle investor to save them. It completely destroyed their legal claim and exposed their entire narrative as a calculated lie. Mr. Davies was ecstatic. "This isn't just a nail in their coffin, Clara," he'd said, a rare smile on his face. "This is the whole damn hardware store." Faced with evidence they couldn't possibly refute, their lawsuit collapsed. They withdrew their claim before it could ever go to court, where the emails would have become public record. The eviction was enforced. I didn't go to the house to watch them leave. I had no desire to see their defeat. Maria drove by later that day and told me it was a sad, pathetic sight. There were no moving vans, just their own luxury cars packed to the brim, leaving the house not with dignity, but like thieves fleeing in the night. Their reputation in the community was shattered beyond repair. A month later, I sold the house. The day I signed the closing papers was one of the quietest, most peaceful days of my life. It was never about the money. It was about severing the final tie. It was about reclaiming the last piece of myself they thought they owned. The story doesn't end with me riding off into the sunset with a new man or a perfect, scar-free life. That's not how healing works. The story ends here, 6 months later, in a small, bright apartment that is entirely my own. The morning sun streams through the window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. On my desk, there's a stack of biology textbooks. I enrolled in the university program I dreamed of all those years ago. My life is smaller now, quieter, but it is authentically mine. The scars are there. Sometimes a loud voice will make me flinch. Sometimes I still have to fight the old habit of making myself smaller to avoid taking up too much space. But the fear is gone. In its place is a quiet strength, a sense of self-worth that no one can take from me ever again. I have my friendship with Maria, a bond forged in fire and truth. I have my dream, no longer deferred but actively being built, one textbook, one lecture at a time. I've learned that true family isn't about shared blood or a shared roof. It's about shared respect and a love that doesn't keep score. They try to take everything from me, but in the end, they gave me the one thing I truly needed, myself. I had to burn down that beautiful, gilded cage to find my real home, the one I carry inside me now. And I have to ask, Have you ever had to walk away from a life that looked perfect on the outside to save yourself on the inside?